Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this session. I hope you're prepared for a very fascinating session with Dr. Carmen Neghina from Study Portals. Carmen will be speaking about the COVID-19 impact on the demand for international education. Study Portals colleagues of Carmen's have presented amazing, really fascinating presentations in the past, and as an organization, they really help you understand the data. So I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting session today. But first, let me give you some background on Carmen. So Carmen is an experienced researcher in higher education and has a PhD in services marketing with a specific focus on co-creation and service interactions, as well as masters in marketing and business administration. So a lot of qualifications there, Carmen. Carmen is also published. She's been published in scientific journals and has co-authored a variety of research articles and white papers, most recently focusing on international education, student mobility, and online studies. So some of the key interesting areas that have been impacted and grown because of COVID, or maybe accelerated. Carmen's also been publicized in the media, including the Times Higher Ed, the BBC, and the Washington Post. So she's a fantastic expert, and we're really grateful for you to speak today, Carmen. Thank you. Without further ado, over to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Richard. I feel the no pressure, definitely. Now, I'll move over to share my own screen. I think that's a bit easier for everybody. But thank you, everybody, for joining. I see we have a lot of nationalities, a lot of countries saying hello, so that's always encouraging. And in this session, I really wanted to have a look a bit at what's been going on over the past year in international education. I think we all have various assumptions as to maybe what destinations are changing in student preferences. Are students looking at different destinations? Are they still interested in doing an on-campus degree? And that's a bit where we wanted to start, and just to see what's been really changing, and not just assumptions, but having a look exactly at, well, what does the data actually say? Now, oh yes. Well, I think that was me. So, well, you've seen that. Oh no, I have to go back. Really sorry. Yes, there we go. My name is Carmen. At the end, you'll also have my email, so you can always ask me whatever questions you want. But to better understand a bit where the data is coming from. Now, Study Portals runs about 7 academic portals, and they all collect data on English taught programs around the world. Currently, there are about 3,700 higher education institutions that we have data on, which accumulates to about 240,000 courses taught in English globally. This is not just the ranked institutions, so the Times Higher QS are the rankings, but it goes beyond that to be more inclusive in terms of what students would really be able to choose from in various destination countries. And I do know we have a big European audience today, and we do know that just the supply of English taught programs in Europe has been significantly growing over the past 10 years. Now, over the last 12 months, the data I'm going to show you has accumulated about 40 million users. The year before it was about 36 million users. But we're going to see that some of the student preferences are really, really changing year on year. Now, a bit of what is unique about this data in relation to, for instance, data you might get from HISA, UNESCO, or any of the other sources is that it is real-time student data. It's data looking at what our students are doing now, and now for us is usually 1 to 1.5 years before students actually enroll. And of course, students can only choose from programs that already exist. So usually we like to combine this student interest with the supply and demand data just to be able to see are students suddenly more interested in business because there's more business programs, or is there just a natural interest for a particular discipline or destination? We've done some data validation, but I won't go into that. You can always ask me questions about it. But overall, what we really saw in terms of interest to study in English is that we saw an interest change by about, well, a drop of about 3% in 2020 compared to 2019. It wasn't, the huge drastic drop of student interest that we were warned by the media, by governments, by anything apocalyptic, but it was a significant drop in that year on year we were used to quite a bit of growth, and we know that also from the enrollment side, also from the what the other national agencies were reporting, so not just our own data. So this was quite interesting in that the market has shrunk a bit in the past year. More interestingly, interest for on-campus programs, so programs really being taught traditionally at a university location, that interest dropped by 5.4%, while interest for online programs, although we also had heard that everybody's going to want to study online now that every university can be online, it only increased by about 5.9%. So that's been quite interesting from that regard as well. Now, we're also seeing quite a few differences across different study levels. So we noticed that interest for master's programs was dropping a bit more than interest for bachelor programs. Again, not a significant drastic change, but still something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of destination preferences, because I know we have a lot of countries represented today, if we look at overall on-campus programs, because those were the ones where we knew that students couldn't travel, we knew that the COVID situation in a particular country would influence particular country brands as well, more than others. What we noticed is that for full-time degrees, so bachelor's and master's programs, the country that was influenced the most was the United States, in that it saw a decline of student interest of about 20% year on year, which is significant. It is good to also keep in mind, though, that this is not only due to COVID. The decline of interest towards the United States was long-term, it's basically bigger in terms of trends. It had started quite a few years ago. Last year, we were already seeing drops of enrollments in IIE even before COVID was even on the table. But of course, the narrative, the lack of control over the virus and everything else is really not playing well towards destination United States. Australia was the second large destination where we saw a really negative impact, and that, of course, was because of the full shutting down of the borders. And we noticed that the discourse of Australian universities, and well, to be honest, just the Australian government in particular, was really detrimental towards students ever having a hope that they can actually even enter the country or continue their studies. And the lack of support was quite seen by quite a few across the international student body. But of course, we also saw destinations increasing in popularity, like Canada and New Zealand. And these were also destinations, well, especially New Zealand, that were overall in control of the situation. Even though borders were closing, at least they were a lot more welcoming. And whenever people could travel, it was a bit easier. And Canada in particular, and they've had an incredibly positive discourse towards prospective students and really tried to make them still welcome as much as they could. And they could really emphasize that in the media as well. For some of the other destinations, like within Europe, what we noticed was slight declines, but nothing major. So we saw a decrease of interest towards Germany for about 5%, Netherlands 4.7%, UK 4.4%, which is kind of in line with the rest of the world. So nothing really major standing out there. Now, if we look at Europe as a study destination, of course, and I'm using Europe in a very broad term here because I've also included Russia, Switzerland. So it's not just EU countries, the UK is also here. What we're noticing is that there are a few countries that really stand out in terms of increasing interest of students. So we've had Austria, we've had the Czech Republic, we've had Portugal and Switzerland, with all of them experiencing growth, whereas other markets were shrinking. And I think the most surprising one has been destination Spain. And I'll show in a few slides why as well. Whereas let's say maybe Finland, and I think here we have Norway and Russia dropped a bit as well, but definitely not as much as destination Spain. And looking a bit as to differences for among these study levels as well, the interest for Austria seems to mostly be growing at the master's level. Belgium was an interesting one in that bachelor level interesting was growing, but master level interest was decreasing at the same time. So overall, the country was decreasing just because Belgium has a stronger supply of master's degrees. If we look at Czech Republic, we saw a huge increase for the bachelor's degrees, although few, but not as much for the master. So that was interesting as well. And if we look at Ireland in particular, also because of Brexit, we did notice that there was a bit more interest for bachelor's degrees, just because we know that students cannot as easily access the UK market at the moment, which was also true for Portugal. And I think Switzerland, similar to Austria, was experiencing more of growth at the master's level. So really interesting. But let's say for destination Spain, which was the one that we saw the biggest decline in, actually, the biggest one was both for bachelor's and master's, so it doesn't seem to be affecting just one study level. And Norway was interesting in terms of decline of interest towards bachelor's programs as well. We can try to hypothesize for some of these with some of these numbers as to what's really driving it, but I think some of you being in the markets might even have quite a few more insights. So if you do, let us know in the comments. And of course, we also wanted to see, okay, overall as a country, a few destinations are decreasing, but is it domestic interest that's changing, or is it interest from outside of the borders? Again, this data is based on IP address. So usually if we say interest to Austria from Austria, it would actually be from the geographical location of Austria. So it can be Austrian nationals, but it can also be international students or in the country. And from Austria, for instance, we saw an increase from outside of the borders, from Czech Republic the same, from Portugal a bit the same, and from Switzerland too. But interestingly, from Czech Republic, it was also domestic interest, and that huge increase you saw for bachelor's degrees for Ireland, it was actually for from Ireland itself. So it was the Irish students that felt they could maybe not travel to the UK as much as they could before. So that was really interesting as well. But we also saw domestic interest rising, Portugal and well, Netherlands as well. And I do think last year Dutch universities experienced overall growth of enrollments, but a lot of it was driven by domestic interest and students who would normally take a gap year, but because they couldn't travel, they decided to study instead. And to also look at which source countries are changing, percentage-wise, some of the most interesting ones, if we look at the high volume countries, so we see that India, which makes up quite a lot of the student interest in terms of enrollment as well, is decreasing by 13.6%, which is quite a significant drop for such a huge market. The US by 14%, Nigeria only by 6%, UK, Pakistan 12-13%. But we also saw really strong increase from Iran, which was quite surprising. Of course, it does come with a big disclaimer that in 2019, there was also a big internet lockdown in Iran. So quite a few people couldn't access internet for a few months. So that's why the spike looks even bigger. But just overall, we see a lot more interest from Iranian students to go abroad. Same from Turkey and also from the Netherlands, which is really interesting. But from Canada, from other regions, we see quite a bit of a decline. Now, in terms of absolute numbers, we also wanted to see a bit what is changing just in some drastic percentages. And if we look at the countries growing the most, we see Iran with 72%, Lebanon, where the explosion in the harbor really acted a bit as a push factor, sending students abroad. So interest from Lebanon, especially towards destination Europe, has been increasing significantly. Same from Ireland, same from Netherlands, and same from South Africa. But we also see a few countries shrinking. So Ghana, Egypt, they have quite significant declines as well. So that's interesting if your institution has ties with those countries if you're recruiting intensively from those countries. And I wanted to in particular also deep dive a bit into Indian student preferences because we know that, of course, they make up a big part of the student population. So I wanted to see which destinations will be most affected. It does seem to be mostly the US, although interest is dropping towards Ireland as well. 21% drop towards the Netherlands, 26% drop towards Australia. The United Kingdom is the only one that seems to be still competitive enough to capture the interest of Indian students and to grow year on year. But I think Brexit combination with the post-work study rights is kind of having an effect there. And that's why the destination is still going well. Canada is only seeing minor changes and Norway as well. So for those countries, it would not be a challenge. And if we look at the US as a country of origin, again, based on IP addresses, we're also seeing that their interest towards the US in particular is dropping, which is incredibly surprising. But maybe not as surprising if you're thinking of all the people that were suddenly unemployed in the US as a result of the pandemic, but also towards Spain, but also towards Italy. So that is overall quite interesting. But interest towards Canada and France is just slightly growing. It's a bit of a silver lining. And last, I also wanted to look at Nigeria, just to have one African country represented as well. And again, here we're seeing really drastic changes for some destinations like the US, Australia, and Germany. But on the other hand, we see a huge increase in destinations that are maybe a bit more affordable, like Poland. We're also seeing increase towards destination Sweden, but also the UK. It is quite surprising to see so many changes within just 1 year of data, just looking at what's been happening this year compared to the year before. But then again, not surprising considering the year that we live in. And I wanted to take this time to also just have a discussion and see what questions you have in the panel that I could answer with some of the data.
So thank you very much, Carmen. That's very interesting. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. There was a question that came into the chat, which was about the impact of borders being changed. So the visa restrictions for borders, would that have worsened the US changes irrespective of the pandemic?
Yes, so that's why the drop towards destination US had started much earlier. And we had also seen that whenever President Trump had imposed restrictions on visas for particular countries, we also saw a significant drop of interest from those countries just because the barrier to access was just absolutely too high. And then we saw those students redirecting themselves and looking at maybe destinations like Canada, destinations like the UK, also quite a bit of Europe. We do notice a lot more interest for Europe overall, and a lot more countries introducing English Dot programs. So it does seem like there's just more diversity and more options for students to choose from.
And you mentioned Trump. Will the US popularity change, or will there be some impact of the US elections?
I do think there will be an impact of the US elections. We've seen some of the original signs already in the data, especially for the countries that had been previously affected by the visa restrictions. However, the challenge, it's the incumbent challenge, as in whenever you had the biggest market share, the second the number of supply of programs doesn't grow as much as the student interest to go study abroad, the US is bound to lose some market share, and especially with the more affordable options located in Europe, located within Asia as well. We do notice a shift towards destination Europe, a shift towards alternative study options that are just a bit more affordable, also because in the next decade, most of the student interest will come from India, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from African countries, which don't have that high affordability that US degrees would require.
So thinking of that, a question that came through, beyond COVID and the disruptions, do you think there will be a change? Will there be any lasting change to traditional destinations, or maybe new destinations and new opportunities, say, for the audience of these institutions?
Well, interestingly, I do think so. I do think I mean, this is, again, a trend that has started years ago, but I think COVID is really going to accentuate it a bit. And that is the requirement for more regional programs. So we've seen, for instance, a huge interest increase towards South Korea, which had managed the pandemic well, but also they have really top-ranked, high-quality universities. They do teach in English. So why, if you're an Asian student, why would you go so far away from home? I don't think, COVID will impact the value of a UK degree or a highly ranked university degree, but it might make things a bit more difficult for universities that are not as highly ranked, that are not as competitive, that maybe haven't been innovating with their portfolio, because, yeah, then the choices will be more and students will have, different reasons to choose different destinations as well.
And also thinking about the mode of delivery, do you think that will COVID have an impact, or have you seen an impact on the growth in online learning, either full online or blended, and will this have a lasting impact?
I think the biggest increase I've seen in online has been on universities talking about wanting to introduce online programs now that they've realized that, well, they've had to do it, and therefore they realized, okay, maybe the barrier wasn't that high and there's something we should consider. The challenge, though, is, as you've seen in the data, the interest for online hasn't grown significantly year on year. It is a market really much dominated by British universities that have been doing this for years and years, and they're really good at doing full degrees online or short courses online. They work with quite a few partners as well. So it's not going to be easy. And keep in mind that just because students can study online, I think being locked at home has also made it so much more valuable to be on campus as well. And the students that want to be on campus are not the same ones as the ones that want to study online. So that's also something to keep in mind.
We have a question from, thank you, Carmen. We have a question here. Do you have statistics on the basis of disciplines, so arts and humanities, social science, natural science and engineering?
We have it for a few disciplines. So the interesting part is we had one hypothesis that there will be suddenly a lot more interest for medicine programs, because we were talking about healthcare a lot. We're talking about doctors and everything that we're doing to kind of keep society afloat in this day and age. So we had this hypothesis there will be a sudden increase of interest towards medicine programs. Not as much. We do notice a few sub-disciplines becoming increasingly popular, but that I think is part of a general trend of Generation Z and what we're interested in. So we see things more related to analytics, business intelligence and analytics, multimedia things, but also sustainability is a really, really big topic. So those programs we see really having significant increase in interest year on year, whereas of course the supply side is a bit slower to catch up, because to really innovate and introduce a program in sustainability, you need to have the resources in-house for it, the academics for it, the knowledge, so that takes a bit longer. But for the universities that are innovating, we do see really good return on investment on those programs, whether they're online or not. So
interesting. And are any particular of the innovative or new programs of appeal to specific cohorts of students from certain locations, sending markets?
Yeah, a few years ago, we also did a bit of analysis into, for instance, who is interested in sustainability. And, normally when you look at year-on-year growth, you see big countries like India, Bangladesh, etc. But what we were noticing then is that it is the countries that are going to be mostly impacted by global change and global warming. So it was countries like Bhutan, which was a really small country. It was Nepal. It was, small Central American countries, which would normally not appear on any radar, but suddenly for particular disciplines, they do show a strong interest. And these are the countries that would also need to go back and apply the knowledge that they've learned to their own countries.
And a good question from Leslie. Do you think that the numbers you discussed, do you think those numbers will have a significant effect on the rankings of those universities?
On the rankings, a bit less, just because, it might be for American universities, just because we know that quite a few rankings use international student numbers as one of their criteria for the ranking. So of course, if Asian universities are enrolling more international students and Americans, less that is going to impact the ranking, but not as significant because it's just one factor. Research quality, research output, faculty teacher ratios, those things don't change drastically year on year. So yes and no at the same time.
And a question from Sarah, the changes and these trends of people, the different statistics or the numbers you were showing, are there any reasons other than COVID, or is COVID the driver for change?
I think COVID is the background for the change. Like I said, some of the trends, like the decline of the US, the interest towards the UK, the slight decline of Australia towards UK, the popularity of Canada, those are not necessarily new. Those things we knew. But what we noticed is that whenever there's a crisis in a particular country that emphasizes maybe a lack of government support, government understanding, we do notice it becomes a push factor for particular countries of origin to go study abroad. And that's a bit what I was mentioning with Lebanon in particular. We saw really a huge increase from Lebanon towards France, Italy, Spain, just wanting to go study anywhere close to Europe. But we also saw interest, for instance, from Iran, which did not have a very good handling of COVID. There was a lot of government mistrust, and suddenly, if the US can be an option, then students are willing to look at it again. So for a few countries, we do definitely notice it. And of course, you have to keep in mind it's also a Brexit year. So it's the year where the Brexit effects are really...
Trying to not mention Brexit, but yeah, this is a key thing, and it's also been asked also. So yes, what do you think will be the impact of Brexit as an opportunity, maybe for other destinations as well?
Yeah, and especially for recruitment from Eastern European countries that were very reliant on the Brexit, on the UK loan scheme. I think it's a really good opportunity for any other European country to look at Romania, to look at Bulgaria, to look at Hungary, to look at even Moldavia in terms of, is there anything we can do to capitalize that interest now? Because students indeed have a barrier to access. And we've spoken to people, to universities who are even using local agents just because they want to make sure that they get that interest as quickly as possible. Of course, digital is always a good option as well in terms of trying out different markets. And even if you don't have a physical presence, even if you can't do fairs, just being top of mind for students might be a good option.
So do you expect the UK to receive fewer EU students in the coming year?
Yes, and that we see in the data as well. But of course, it gets off balance by non-EA students. And whenever we do surveys asking non-EA students what we think about Brexit, they always think, amazing, finally, the playing field is leveled. I have a higher chance of getting accepted just because European students will not get the preferential treatment anymore. So that's a bit the discourse. And of course, for UK universities, the income from non-EA students is going to be much needed as well. The one part I'm worried about, of course, is Scottish universities, but because even if non-EA students weren't paying tuition fees, at least they still made quite a big part of the student body, which, like you said, does influence rankings, does influence funding. So something to keep in mind.
Well, look, thank you very much. That was really interesting. It's fascinating. Thank you for presenting that data and answering so many questions. And thank you, everybody, for joining this presentation. We'll be sharing Carmen's presentation and contact details with the audience. We now have a short break, and in 10 minutes, both the Marks, Mark Couchman and Mark Wilson. So that's our business development director for Europe and our regional development manager for Spain and Portugal will be talking about international progression pathways. That's at 1:20. But until then, get a cup of tea. Carmen, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
Very interesting. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.